I've made videos in which I have argued that if Yahweh is perfectly good, he cannot be omnipotent, because being perfectly good would mean being incapable of committing an act of evil. Some folks have disputed this assertion. They believe that if a being is capable of committing evil but never does, we can still accurately consider that being to be perfectly good. The problem I have with this is that many apologists define God as the greatest conceivable being. I think it stands to reason that the greatest conceivable being would not be a being you can even imagine committing an evil act. If Yahweh is the greatest conceivable being, then not only would such a being never commit an act of evil in actuality, it would be a contradiction to be able to think of this being committing an act of evil, even hypothetically. It would be logically impossible for the greatest conceivable being to commit an act of evil. If it is logically impossible for the greatest conceivable being to commit an act of evil, then it would also be contradictory to say that the greatest conceivable being is omnipotent. The standard apologist response to this is to say that being incapable of doing logically contradictory things doesn't make a being non-omnipotent. I agree when it comes to things that are inherently contradictory, like being a married bachelor or drawing a square circle, because those things are inherently incoherent and meaningless. However, if a being is incapable of doing something that is not inherently contradictory, like committing an act of evil, then that does mean that such a being is not omnipotent, even if it has a nature that makes such an act logically contradictory for it. To meaningfully say that a being is omnipotent is to say that it has a nature that allows it to do anything that is not inherently logically impossible. If omnipotence simply means being able to do anything that is not logically impossible given one's nature, then I am omnipotent. I can do anything that is not logically contrary to my nature as a mortal, finite, material being. The reason I don't consider myself to be omnipotent is because I have a nature that makes certain otherwise logically possible feats logically impossible for me to achieve. If Yahweh has a nature that prohibits him from being capable of doing things that are not inherently contradictory, then he is also not omnipotent.